This is so cool, you're gonna love it. Some families select their baby's future spouse from birth. Oh no, what have you done? What do you think about this? Pause for a couple of minutes and write your answers in your notes. Did you see that? It shattered. So bargaining power is about who gets to have the lion's share in negotiations. Can you have your way? And it depends on the alternatives available to each side. Are you unique or are you just plain vanilla? So one example is employment contracts. If you are a minimum wage worker, then there are millions out there like you, so good luck. It's about how many options each side has and how much they depend on each other. So another example is how most students are so docile to the prof and tend to obey because of the power dynamic between them. And this effectively amounts to monopoly power, and monopoly means a single provider of a service. So if you don't know that, write it down. The gist of it all is the availability of alternatives. So it means that the greater one's elasticity, the higher is one's bargaining power. But also the more human capital and the more information one has, then they're going to have more bargaining power. So that's kind of like a formula for bargaining power. And all this is in relative sense. It's about how your advantage is compared to other side of the deal. That's how elastic you are compared to them, how much human capital you have compared to them, and how much special information you have. And they should know this. It's not enough just to have the advantage. And thus the significance of signaling, which we're going to see. There is more to bargaining power and some cool exceptions, but this should be a good start. As a general rule of thumb, more of these is better than less, especially in the long run. So pause here, record the slide number, and try to summarize this slide for yourself. All this mess is part of game theory, which is a cool branch of economics. It talks about strategic decision making, which is kind of like when you play chess. Your outcome depends on what others do and vice versa. And often there is a conflict between individual interest and mutual interest. If there's a way to maintain cooperation, then both sides are better off. But it's not always easy to sustain the cooperation unless the game is repeated over time. Because in a repeated game, your fates are intertwined. You cannot ignore the other side's well-being. In prostitution, one side only wants the sex, the other only wants the money. They don't really care about each other's fate and future. It's only for one night. But in marriage, in a long-term relationship, one can't ignore the other side's interests. This also explains why grandparents tend to spoil their grandchildren, because they get to see them only once in a while. It's the parents who have to put up with the misbehavior of this stupid kid. So they have the incentive to discipline the child. The same happens between the two parents. The parent who always spends time with their kids takes the role of discipline. The one who's never there spoils the kids when they're around. What a mess. When you go on a date and say, I'll pay the bill, it means there is no I or you, but a we. That's much more likely to happen in a repeated game when you expect the relationship to continue. It's a calculated, rational decision. If you pay the bill in a one-time encounter, knowing that they're not going to see you again to pay you back, that's a pretty selfless move. Now you might be like, hang on, the family is a single unit and a couple in a relationship seeks to maximize their joint utility. That's called the income pooling hypothesis, which has been rejected by many studies. It's not true that a couple who form a family are gonna function as one unit. Self-interest is still very much at play, especially in the long run. People enter a relationship because they perceive its expected rewards to outweigh its costs. It's only in the honeymoon stage that you think you have no interest beside that of your partner. That's the romantic love complex, which is kind of non-rational. It obscures the premarital calculations and bargaining running in the background. It's there, but not so present. Infatuation is only a short-term phenomenon. And most of our relationships in school, in business, in romance are forms of social exchange driven by reward seeking. Even the parental love is rather self-serving. Pure, selfless love is very rare and usually not sustainable in the long run. What drives human behavior in the long run is not love, but it's reason and the search for power and reward, as Nietzsche said. This is not something to be upset about. Remember, economics is not about good or bad. You're not like, oh no, what a mess. It's just about the nature of the beast. That's what we are, and let's not deny it. Let's not fool ourselves, we are not angels. A game is reciprocal, which means it depends on giving and receiving by both sides. If it's only one-sided, then there's no game. It's not sustainable. So don't go too fast. Don't get too close. Give your partner the chance to reciprocate and give yourself the chance to be rewarded. It can't always be night nor always day. So the reward solidifies the relationship. And the same goes with friendships. If it's only one side who invites the other, then they're like, what have you done? It's much less likely for that relationship to continue than if they alternate. So reward seeking can both bind and dissolve a relationship. It's a double-edged sword. The same goes with conflict. It's not unhealthy or bad in and of itself. What matters is how it's managed. Value is not whether we are together or we separate, but how we are together and how we separate. So here's a super profound observation. That's so cool. Which goes beyond economics. It's not about what we do, but how we do it. It's not the event or action which matters, but rather how we take it. It's okay not to meet someone. It's okay not to respond to them. It's okay to break up with them. Basically, everything can be okay. But what matters is how we do it. And by how, I mean our attitude and our mindset. Do we do it with attachment and out of ego or not? And the ego shows itself in the form of resentment, condemnation, and self-victimization. And the same goes with all noble objectives. It's important to seek justice and to tell the truth, but even more important is how we do it. If we are not sensitive about the how, we may end up doing more harm than good. So that I would say is quite important. So pause here. This was an important slide and summarize it in 1 or 2 sentences in your notes. If someone has a special skill, it means that the demand for them is inelastic since they have a high unique human capital. So they can earn what is called economic rent. That's a margin above their opportunity cost. Now, porn stars aren't like that. Prostitutes don't have that much bargaining power against the pimps or madams because they're young and they don't have much experience or connections, and there are thousands of them entering the market each year, reaching the age. That's why these young girls are often abused because they don't have the bargaining power, especially when it is illegal. Another example here is that most people marry someone of their own kind who is close to them financially, academically, and racially. Now, why? One of them is that it's much easier to find a mate in one's immediate circles. Also, most of us enjoy people who are like us, and it's easier to strike the best bargain possible. Now, even if a couple from different backgrounds really get along and love each other, the two of them, in the long run, those power dynamics will kick in and can complicate their relationships, especially when the in-laws are also involved and you want to keep some connection with them. That's why those with more experience advise us not to get too adventurous and not to step out too much. This is also why some people don't want their spouse to advance a lot in education or work. It's not simple jealousy, but it's about the power dynamics in the relationships and who gets to make the decisions. And in most cultures, there's also a lot of social norms and stigma about who should have the upper hand. You can also interpret what it means to fall in love. It means that the other side has some unique features that are not substitutable by others. Basically, it's making oneself inelastic. The same goes with children. We love our kids so much because we're convinced that the stupid kid is one of a kind. And that's really true in the sense that we cannot substitute our kids. That's why kids can demand and receive so much from their parents. But parents are also not substitutable, especially when the kids depend on their provision. That's why parents get to have so much authority. Here's a useful tip. Even though every person is unique, the satisfaction that we receive from the person is substitutable. This is very good news because it helps us not develop toxic relationships through too much attachment and possessiveness. It's both empowering and liberating. Another example is if one side really wants something and can't satisfy it outside the relationship, then they'll have to put up with anything that the other side asks, right? Another example is how some people have an easy or hard time finding a mate depending on the program or college that they attend. So there you go, you get a bunch of examples in this slide, and it can help a lot understand the gender differences in traditional and modern societies. All marriages are arranged. The question is, who arranges them? For most of human history, the primary sources of subsistence were land and physical labor. And once kin and clan offered the land, So they had the power to decide one's mate and fate. And since there were high returns on heavy manual labor, men usually had more bargaining power. But with the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, it was human capital which determined productivity, which is owned by the individual and is much more equitably distributed between the sexes. So instead of your family throwing you in the, oh, that's so cool. Instead of your family throwing you in the well, you get to jump into it yourself out of love. What a mess. And notice how different this is from the common rhetoric of getting so bitter about patriarchy. It's not because people in the past were less moral. They had as much integrity and intelligence as we do. They were making a rational allocation of resources given their circumstances. Another example is if one was the single child or had no sibling or had siblings, it mattered a lot in a society where land is a determining factor. These traditional societies developed their own ways of bargaining power in order to empower their daughters as they're giving them in marriage. Now, some of us may say that these are ways of oppressing women as second-class citizens, but there is more to that because we're dealing about the fathers who are making these decisions and subscribing to those values. You can see how social norms and ethical values are so closely tied to people's living reality and economic status. This can be one meaning of morality being relative as relational and contextual. So pause here and take some notes and record this slide number. Erotic capital is a category of human capital, and it consists of sex appeal like beauty, oh, aren't they cute, outfit including perfume, jewelry, cosmetics, hairstyle, and being charming. And you guys, geez, get lost, but in terms of being lively and even flirting. To some extent, it's a matter of genetic inheritance, but one can cultivate it like human capital. And it's a source of bargaining power in one's sexual behavior. So one obvious example is the choice of partner, the position, and contraception. So basically one can trade or exchange their erotic capital for restriction on sexual behavior, the timing and all those things. In the male sex market, escorts with more erotic capital tend to take the penetrative or top role. Those with less tend to take the receptive or bottom role. That's so graphic, geez. Now listen carefully. Erotic capital is higher among those who invest in it. Duh, just like any other ability. Now the question is, who would invest more in it? So other things being equal, it's higher among those who have fewer options elsewhere because of their opportunity cost. So it's a very rational decision in terms of who gets to develop more erotic capital. So let me give you a few examples. You may hear that those who are pretty are not very intelligent. Now, these are nasty jokes that you should avoid under all circumstances, but still, why do these jokes develop? It's not mere jealousy. You can make sense of these jokes using this analysis. So if you're good in school, you don't need to put on so much makeup because you have other ways of empowering yourself and beating others. But if you suck at school, then go nuts. Another example is plastic surgery. There is great imbalance in cosmetic surgery between the sexes in all countries. The ratio is about 80-20. It shows that there are greater returns on it for one sex compared to another. Another example is advertisement. Which sex do you most commonly see nude in ads? And why is that? Remember, ads cost a lot and advertising agents aim at the greatest expected return on their investment. Once again, you can see how our norms and values develop, like how most societies associate beauty and jewelry more with one gender and valorize it compared to the other. It's because they get a greater return on their investment and social norms evolve according to that. But once one is married, they may not invest as much in grooming themselves because the returns will no longer be as significant. Wow, that was cool. Signaling relates to the information aspect of bargaining power. It's to show that you're exotic, that you're not plain vanilla. And sometimes the distinction itself is a source of utility to satisfy our vanity. Behind some cars, you see something like V8, four-wheel drive, and so forth. This is basically the idea is that you cannot see this from behind the car. It's under the hood. Now, somebody has paid the extra to get these features, to get the upgrades, so now they are entitled to show it off. A similar one is in front of some people's names, they put this thing, PhD. Whenever you see that, they're effectively saying, show respect. It's a way of proving one's professionality. And you can see it among your teachers. Some of them tell you more about their educational and family background. They do it when they feel that if they don't convey that information, they would be treated differently, as less than adequate. And a similar one is Ivy League degrees. CVs in general serve this purpose, to signal your competence, and they're used for screening. Another example is women who keep their own name earn on average 20% more than those who take their husband's name, controlling for other things. Now, why is that? It's a signal of prioritizing professional career over family, which is true because these women on average have less children and work more hours. Uniforms and medals are like that. Among doctors and nurses, sometimes the colors are different exactly to distinguish the hierarchy. These are all subtle forms of enforcing power. And it doesn't have to be fancy or neat. Distressed denim follows exactly the same logic. It's a sign of status depending on what the society values. Tattoos also can show that one is cool or powerful or a rascal depending on the norms and values. In fact, the entire fashion industry is based on signaling. Another example is hijab. When someone dresses modestly, they're sending a signal that, hey, keep your limits, I'm not an object. No matter how we appear in the society, that is a signal. The question is what kind of eyes we'd like to attract. The high cost of advertisement is a sign of producers' confidence and conviction about the quality and service because they're spending so much on it. Oh, we've been around for 100 years, so we're a successful business with a lot of experience. That's why they put it there on their bag or whatever. Coding statistics using fancy formulas with weird Greek symbols, all that is a sign of professionality, as the little prince said about the Turkish astronomer whose outfit was too traditional, so he wasn't taken seriously. Grown-ups love numbers. What a mess. Another couple of examples are nuclear power and military base. So mobilizing troops closer to one's border, like the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 or the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and 2022. It's just like the birds inflating their throats or emitting chemicals that this is my territory, this is my mate. Here's another example from game theory, which is pretty cool. Credible threat or promise. It's persuading the other side to cooperate, which is a function of one's bargaining power. When workers go on strike or the Earth Strike Day, these primarily have a signaling significance to show solidarity. And you have these cameras for speed or in buildings. Again, the idea is to send a signal that, hey, watch out, right? Now you might be like, hang on, why should they reveal the camera if they want to get a ticket and make money? And the answer is the objective is not making money. The objective is to reduce accidents. Another example is corporal punishment, like spanking. It's not so much the physical pain, but the signal that the parent is sending to the child, which is painful. It's psychological. This is applicable to the beginning of relationships also, like replying frequency. If you reply all the way, if you answer right away, what it implies is that I depend on you or that I really love you, which is pretty much the same thing if you think about it, as opposed to being patient, which implies a greater bargaining power. But once the relationship is built, then these signals are no longer applicable. Now you can see that literally we are playing game theory on a daily basis, and anything interpersonal is game theory. So economics is not about what people should do, but making sense of what people are already doing. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. It's positive, not normative. I love you is a signal. That's why it's tricky to decide when to say it and how to respond, because it implies some anticipation behind it. And that's why it's kind of unsettling to hear. Oh no, they're on to me. And the same goes about when and where to say honey. And if you say it too much, it will lose its taste. The signal becomes weaker, diminishing marginal value. And a couple more examples from dating and relationships. Now the thing here is, from a purely rational perspective, much of what we do, like the way we display our wealth, our power, and romance, is rather silly and absurd, and it may even be gross. Think of the romantic kiss. If anyone else were to enter your mouth, you'd be like, yo, what have you done? Get the hell out of here. What a mess. but it has signaling significance. All right, now this was a rich slide full of substance and examples. I would say write at least 3 other examples of your own for signaling and do some drawing for yourself. It really helps you retain the material. Economists have a problem with gifts. It's a headache and it just doesn't make sense. The problem is what to choose so that it's not a waste of resources. And the wrapping, the box, the bag, and all the useless, stupid paper around it is just additional waste. What's the point of it anyway? For just a few seconds? Get to the real substance. That's why we have developed money as a neutral medium that can be converted to whatever you want. Because direct exchange of goods is not efficient since the other side may not desire what you're giving them. And that's why many places give you a gift receipt so that the recipient can go and exchange the garbage you got them for some other garbage. Oh, I mean, store credit. But the gift is a signal that I was thinking about you, that I took the time to go to the store and wrap it up and all that. So it's a rational behavior, and it's a cool branch of economics called behavioral economics. A good example of that is cut flowers. They're absolutely useless. At least get a pot that can live for a while. By the way, all this is when you want to prove your love and impress the other side. Once that's done, money can do. That's why you don't mind monetary gifts from your parents, because you're confident about their love. Another example is an expensive wedding ring, which signals your intention to not do a postcoital dash. Another example is, imagine 2 siblings, one is 10 and the other one is 2. If you give something to the older sibling, the younger one also wants it and they're going to cry for it. Now, it's totally useless for them given their age, but it's not the object that matters, but the signal that the older one has qualified for some attention and the younger one doesn't want to fall behind. So summarize the slide in one sentence using your own words. Knowledge is power, and this is the age of information where governments and companies are literally purchasing data. Asymmetric information, also called incomplete or imperfect information, is when there is a lack of transparency and can result in inefficiency as one side can take advantage of the other. It's mainly applied to insurance. One form of it is moral hazard, which is when one does not take the risk seriously since they are covered. So for instance, like put on your condom and don't rely on her to take the insurance of the pill. Or when we don't take full care of ourselves, when we know that if we get sick, there's going to be government coverage in terms of medical care. More generous welfare programs discourage and disincentivize household saving for a rainy day because they will no longer be qualified for the support because the taxes are so high and because they rely on the government program to cover for them. That's what we see in Scandinavian countries where the middle class saving is very low, creating a huge wealth inequality. Also, one is less likely to look for a job or accept one when there is employment insurance. Another form of information asymmetry is adverse selection, which is when the insurer is unaware of relevant personal traits and that results in a low quality outcome. So what happens is that those who are more at risk are more likely to purchase life insurance. Another cool example is how car owners are more likely to sell their car if it's a lemon, which means a car with a major defect. And that was coined by George Akerlof, who won the Nobel Prize for his awesome work on the economics of information. The buyer doesn't know how functional the car is, so they're like, oh no, what's going on here? So they're always suspicious that there might be a lemon, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy since they would have a lower willingness to pay. But the owners of the good cars, the plums, aren't willing to sell at that price, and so only the lemons remain in the market. What a mess. Another example is from dating apps. All right, calling them losers is mean, but you get the point. And it's not true anymore, but at the beginning it was. Online dating actually enhances efficiency by lowering search costs. It's quite clever. But there are also a whole bunch of limits out there, let's not deny it. As a general rule, transparency enhances efficiency. Whether it's sexual exchange or a business deal, more transparency is better because it allows the two sides to focus more on things that actually matter rather than indirect signals. The problem is all the emphasis on privacy and confidentiality nowadays. Sure, privacy is valuable, but it comes at a huge expense, and we as a society don't seem to realize the sacrifice we are making for it. Pause here and take notes. Today's lesson was kind of packed. Thanks for bearing with me. Time for practice. Give a shot at these questions in your notes before you proceed. Try to use what you learned in today's lesson. Bargaining power depends on three main factors. Information asymmetry can be in the form of moral hazard or adverse selection, and resources can be erotic capital or human capital. Elasticity depends on alternatives and is communicated through signaling. The two main concepts that you really want to get is bargaining power and elasticity. So do your own concept map. If you want to do mine, that's fine, but maybe add a couple more concepts that are not here and rearrange things so that it's yours. Let's go back to our initial scenario. How would you analyze this based on what you learned today? Pause here and write your answers before I show you the student sample. So for the incentives, one could say that there is concern for inheritance where land is the major resource and families have bargaining power. A top-down approach would be mandating verification and modifying inheritance laws. However, the power dynamics will still be there and will likely leak in somehow, and families may retaliate. A bottom-up solution might be, well, patience, because as technology improves, there will be high returns on capital, and with that, the family dynamics and marriage behavior is going to change as well. There were some deep insights in today's lesson. I hope you noticed. Have a great day.